My name is Derek Gard. I currently work for Bitner Insurance Group. I've been in the property and casualty liability insurance business for about 11 years, and most of that I've spent focused on international nonprofits. The first one is knowing your risks, specifically internationally. I talked about one of the things that you asked the question of, what do you see that's kind of, what do most agencies missing in their program? And one of them is like, they're just missing a whole policy they should have. And the other one is that like, they've got states where they don't have work comp, or that's the biggest thing that I see is that can become very laborious, is like, it sounds crazy, but having a list of all the autos that you own. I mean, you and I went through we were working together on a really large denominational mission sending agency. And it was a huge project for them just to try to figure out all the properties that they owned internationally, right? Like, because these guys had been around for hundreds of years, they'd acquired properties. And the story, anybody listening if you're still listening, that's been in a mission sending agency, there's no standard way that you buy a property in Senegal, right? It's like, somebody knows somebody and we think we want to do this here and then we're going to buy it. And so imagine when that happens over 100 years and it's like you bring in a new director and they're trying to figure out all of the properties that they own, where do they own all the autos, what countries are all their employees in, what's their payroll for, how many foreign nationals or local nationals do they employ. So keeping really good records on what your risk is internationally from the properties you own, how many teams you send, like keeping track of that data, it's going to, number one, it's going to let you pull out the picture and see where all you're exposed and what kind of exposures you have. It's going to help your agent and risk manager to make sure that we're putting the appropriate policies in place. So that's the first one. Coverage territories is another one. Every insurance policy and I tell people this, if you want to find out if your agent is good at doing international risk, ask them what their coverage territory is, what your coverage territory is on all of their policies, and see how long it takes them to respond to you. That's like the easiest test. And also like one they should be able to answer very easily, because like you're unique and you don't just operate in, Charlotte metro area or whatever. So understanding your coverage territories, what are the coverage territory limitations, and are you putting other policies in place to cover you globally? So coverage territory is a big one, and every policy has it. It's not hard to find. Pull up the policy, Control F territory, and you're going to find it on there pretty quickly. Review your exclusions. So every policy, and this is when I was learning insurance, I thought this was like a sneaky trick that some lawyer figured out way when they were putting policies together. So your insurance policy is going to have endorsements that sometimes aren't endorsements, they're actually exclusions. So most of your exclusions come on your policy in the form of an endorsement, and they're usually at the end or the beginning, and you can pull up your policy and like just take 20 minutes to read through those and understand what they are. You're going to find something on there that may set off an alarm bell, and it'll start a conversation with your agent.
Yeah. Some of those common exclusions would be restrictions of coverage territory, war exclusions. It's going to help you understand whether or not you are actually protected in all the countries that you need to be protected in, and whether or not the work that you're doing is actually protected. Because you talked about Israel, there were a lot of agencies that stood up after that event and said, well, we want to go to Israel. There's a lot of
Mhm.
insurance policies that aren't going to protect those agencies
Yeah.
going into an area impacted by war.
Yeah, it's crazy. We've seen a lot of times we don't see policies get changed, like the main policy form get changed with exclusions for named countries, but we're seeing Israel, like everybody's throwing that on now. It feels like Uh, Ukraine was another one too, obviously. So yeah,
Yep.
you know. Um, this goes back to the bucket analogy that I talked about, and understand the risk that you're not insuring and communicating that to your board. Because if you're the fiduciary for a company, if you're a CFO, if you're operations director, executive director, and you're deciding we're not going to do a kidnap and ransom policy, right? Like make sure that, that's an agreed upon decision. Everybody understands we're not putting this, put it in your board minutes. I would say make sure that you understand the risk that you're self-insuring, and that you understand that, because that's another big one.
That's a good
Uh,
practice from a risk management perspective. Make an active decision about
mhm.
what you're going to self-insure because the worst thing that can happen is to be surprised.
Yep. Yep. You don't want to be surprised, and you also don't want your board coming to you and saying, "Why didn't you do this?" You want to be able to feel like, "Hey, this was a conversation that we all had, and this is the decision that we made. We'll live by it." Yeah, not assuming. We talked a little bit about this, especially on health insurance. I mean, this ties back to the coverage territory one. I think a lot of organizations assume that they have a policy that's going to, because it's here in the States, that it's going to cover them internationally, which is just, it's not the case. And in fact, it's even sometimes worse than that. You may have, there's a lot of work comp carriers, there's a lot of general liability carriers that if they find out that you are operating extensively internationally, they'll non-renew you. Like not only does their coverage not extend and it's limited, but they don't even want to insure you if you have those types of operations. So don't assume that um, it's gonna extend. The last one I would say is making sure your key staff and your board understand your crisis response plan. Have that written out. Um, there's you can go through tabletop exercises of fake scenarios that we talked about and how it would engage, and having your decision trees and all of those things, just as much detail as you can put into that. And then the other side of that, I tell people, like, once you put that policy in place, make sure it's something that you can live with, because if you don't follow it, you're going to get in trouble. It actually opens you up to more liability. But making sure you have a written crisis response plan, everybody, your key leaders and your board understands what that is, and how to utilize it.